Illinois' 5 states-operated public employee retiree pension funds are only about 42% funded, and they have a $140 billion unfunded pension liability. And that's a long-term cost that the state just can't shake. But it's not just the state pensions. You've also got local police and firefighter pension funds that also have an unfunded liability. And I want to say they're about 55% funded or so, depending on which fund you look at for police or firefighters after all of those funds were consolidated. But that faces a challenge in the Illinois Supreme Court. They have yet to set a hearing date on when that'll be heard, but that challenge persists. But when it comes to the pension issue, obviously there's a lot of eyes on this because that's a substantial amount of debt that the state has to manage, and about 1 out of every 5 tax dollars the state takes in is going to public sector pensions, the 5 funds that the state has. S&P Global Ratings, they released a report yesterday about Illinois' poorly funded pensions and how it's going to continue to stress state and local governments and their budgets. And the report is called Pension Spotlight, Illinois, and it was released yesterday. In announcing the report, they expect costs will keep rising because of contributions significantly short of meaningful funding progress. Plans are poorly funded, and the Illinois Pension Code allows plans to use assumptions and methodologies that defer costs. So I reached out to S&P and we connected, and I chatted with a couple of their analysts, Joe Vadziak and Todd Canister, and they broke down what the report spells out. Here is Joseph talking about, he was the author of the report, what ultimately this spells out for Illinois' pension woes.
I think the whole analogy is going to be used a lot with this piece. They are moving in a positive direction. We're highlighting some of the positive developments that have occurred here with Illinois pensions in the recently, including the supplemental payments, the savings that they're generating now with the tier 2 benefits. But as you kind of mentioned, the hole, it is a big hole. They got a lot of digging to do. And they're making progress on that. And there's still some risks and some difficulties on the way out.
Part of the report talks about demographic trends that don't look great, population decline as well, and how that could be compounding some of the problems here. I asked Vanderzak to ultimately break that down and what they're looking at when it comes to the overall costs and the pressures on taxpayer-funded budgets.
Well, the actuaries who are recommending the contributions and the statutory funding guidelines are all based on a level percent of payroll. So for example, you talk about the demographics. If payrolls don't grow at the rate that they're set forth within the Illinois statutes or by the actuarial recommendations, that's going to defer costs. The costs are determined based on this percentage of payroll. And if your payroll is not growing on the percentage that they anticipate, costs get deferred and are going to have to be picked up with larger contributions down the line. And there's a number of assumptions that the state uses in the Illinois Pension Code that could create some risk down the road. Right now they're expecting contributions to increase and remain a relatively level percent of the budget. But, if those assumptions fail to materialize or fall short, it could creep up a little bit more.
So that's Joseph Vadziak, who is the author of the S&P report, but he also had another analyst with him.
Income for a pension.
Todd Canister. Todd, he talks about more of kind of in depth of what Joseph's reports ultimately spells out for the pensions.
Income for a pension plan comes from 2 places: investments and contributions. So we've already mentioned discount rate, assumed return. That's the market risk side. On the other side is everything else, everything that Joe described here. Anything that leads to a contribution shortfall will lead to a revenue shortfall for the plan.
And Todd also talked about the idea of 90% funded, which is where the pension ramp is supposed to get Illinois pensions by 2045, I believe is the date. But, actuaries, they want full funding, not 90% funding. Todd kind of breaks this down a bit from the idea of what it means for these funds to not be fully funded according to the plan.
So, well, I mean, this is just funding to 90%. Their goal is 90% funding. So that means they're not, that's our very first point of our, we have a guidelines out there. And number one is, do they have a plan to reach full funding? And if they have a plan in place that is not geared toward full funding, we generally view that negatively because, so if they're funding it, I'm just going to kind of repeat myself here. Sorry for being clumsy, but they're funding to 90%, so they don't have a plan to fund fully. That tends to be one of the factors toward shorting the contributions for the year.
So again, we're hearing from some S&P analysts about Illinois' pension woes. Joe Vadziak and Todd Canister chatted with them yesterday about their report, highlighting how Illinois has a substantial amount of work to do to get out of its pension hole. While it is making some progress, including increased funding for pensions, it's not enough to fully handle the overall costs. Some of those costs include other post-employment benefits. That's the health care that state retirees get. And for Tier 1, it's fully subsidized by taxpayers. And that's a cost that's not necessarily included in that $140 billion unfunded pension liability. I've seen estimates that tack on another $50+ billion for health care costs that's not being funded. And Joe Vadziak, he breaks down the OPED benefits, the other post-employment benefits, and how those are impacting the bottom line here.
The OPEB benefits, they are working under the like there's a teacher's health insurance fund, which is paying some OPEB liabilities, but most of it's funded on a pay-as-you-go basis. The key risk here is that the premiums related with these plans that they're paying, so the insurance companies, increase at a pace farther than, create some budgetary pressure down the line. Those costs increase. We're seeing medical costs inflate at a higher rate than the normal CPI does. We've seen a track record of that, which could lead to higher insurance costs, higher premiums, and the state was going to have to make up that with the higher contributions in the future. I think they've made some minor, relatively de minimis increases to the funded ratio of some of the OPEB plans here. But this is pretty similar for most pay-as-you-go plans throughout the country. It's a low cost now, but as these, inflation for medical care continues to increase, these costs are going to grow.
More from them. We've talked primarily about the state's pension funds, but what about those local police and fire pension funds? That was part of their report released yesterday from S&P Global Ratings. And they highlight that this is a developing story when it comes to Illinois' local pension funds. And more from Joseph Vadziak.
It's still a emerging story. We still haven't had any annual reports out of these plans. It's kind of a growing story. Right now, we are seeing the assumed rate of returns used in these plans. And we do note from our last pension brief back in 2021 that is going to actually result in some of these plans taking on a little bit more market risk as their discount rates were lower than that. It's going to result in improved funded ratio, but again, more market risk, more volatility. And for some of these places in Illinois, more volatility could be difficult for them to incorporate into the budgets.
So the local pension funds, that picture still has yet to be fully painted, and something that S&P Global Ratings is putting on their radar as they continue to analyze public sector credit ratings. So yesterday's report from S&P did not include a rating action. I think it's important. It just merely is an overview of where the state is with its pension situation. And you have some final words here about comparing Illinois' pension situation to the rest of the country. And Todd Canister with S&P Global Ratings breaks that down for us. And go.
The story behind Illinois is some of these large plans, as you can see from Joe's report here, they're poorly funded, 42, 43%. That's not the worst in the country, but it's certainly not the best in the country. There's also funding discipline, not only where they are, but where they're going. Are they contributing enough? And so as Joe mentioned here, there's a lot of aspects here in Illinois that are very complicated and are not directly tied to an actuarial recommendation. So we see some improvements here, as Joe mentioned, but they're not fully contributing the actuarial recommendation on as you can see on that what is that, chart 3, sorry. So as far as where they are compared to other states, there's too many factors to just sort of put them in one line. But, and I don't want to step on Joe's message here, they are poorly funded. There's a lot of risk. They've taken some steps, both on the liability side and on the asset side, to start to address some of these risks.
So again, those are just a couple of analysts from S&P Global Ratings I chatted with yesterday about a very wonky issue that's driving a major amount of taxpayer cost in the state, both in state taxes and local taxes. And when you look at the local picture, a lot of places have high property taxes, and how are they going to be able to sustain those high property taxes if people leave that area because of high property taxes? And if they don't have taxpayers to fund the growing pension costs, you can see how that could start spiraling in the wrong direction, causing substantial problems and pressures on not just state but local budgets as well. So go and check out the reports I published yesterday, and you can see that at thecentersquare.com. S&P Illinois' poorly funded pensions continue to stress state and local budgets. So you can find that linked at my Twitter account. Just search Bishop on Air, and we can connect that way. It is Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's news and